So I want to congratulate everyone here. We are the only people in this conference that are not sick of talking about goddamn chatbots. So welcome, thank you for coming. So let's talk about chatbots. What is a chatbot? Quite simply, it's just a computer program that simulates a conversation with a human. And there could be AI involved, there could not be AI involved. Here's an example of something I came up with. This doesn't exist, this is just a demo, called EmojiBot, although EmojiBot does actually exist in the Slack store, it's not this. But this is just a demo of talking to a bot, and the bot responds with what it interpreted you said. But bots are not new things. This is Alan Turing. He's a real human, not a bot. And in 1950, you guys are all probably aware, he created the Turing test, which he asked people if a conversation was between two humans or between a human and a machine. And in 1965, in the MIT AI lab, a person by the name of Joseph Weizenbaum created what is widely known as the first chatbot called ELIZA, which was it mimicked a psychiatrist. You gave it symptoms, and it would respond to what it thought was a diagnosis. It was largely inspired off of Alan Turing's work. And then we're going to go all the way to 1995. Now, a lot of important things happened between 1965 and 1995, like IRC was invented. But we're going to get to the more important stuff, which is this. Does anybody know what this is? This is Microsoft Bob, and it had a little dog on the side named Rover, who also made an appearance in Windows XP. And it would watch what you did and tried to guide you through the user interface, which led to, everyone knows what this is. Everyone has tried to find the setting to turn this off. Then in 2000, a company called ActiveBuddy created an application called Smarter Child, which was a bot that sat inside AOL Instant Messenger and MSN Messenger, and you could talk to it, which was largely also inspired by ELIZA. And then 2007, does anybody know what this is? This is the first version of Siri. It was an app on the iPhone before Apple bought it in 2010. But you could talk to it or type stuff out. So when I talk about chatbots, I'm also talking about bots that you use your voice to interface with, because that's just an extra step that just has to change that voice into text. And then now we have today, which gives us all these platforms to create bots with. Slack is pretty much leading the way in the workplace, so we're going to focus on Slack today. But all these platforms pretty much work the same, and I'll give some differences when we talk about them. So, why should we care? As developers, why do we care about chatbots? Because obviously everybody on the internet cares about chatbots nowadays. How many people in here have more than 20 apps installed on their phone? Right, everybody. How many people just use like 3 of them or 4 of them? Yeah. And that's the problem, right? With that current app store, the app overload, people use about 3 apps. The top apps on iOS, 2 are owned by Facebook. One is Facebook Messenger, one is Facebook, and the other is YouTube. But those are third-party apps. The largest used apps is SMS. So people are using these apps to talk to their friends and coworkers and their family already. And these are all familiar. You already know how to use it. It has a pretty easy user interface. It's just a text box that you type stuff into. And there's no barriers. There's nothing to install. You're already using it. You already have it on your device. A good example of this is Uber. So Uber, of course, has their iOS and Android apps. They even have Microsoft Windows and BlackBerry apps. But they also have SMS and Slack and Facebook and HipChat. You can order an Uber from every one of those devices any which way. And so their kind of philosophy is be where your users are. And that's a huge opportunity for us as developers. So why should we care as developers is I like to think of 1986, that kind of decade, as the year of the box. You would go into a, Sears maybe. I don't know if Best Buy wasn't around then, I don't think. And you'd see a shelf of software, right? And in order to get that on that shelf, there was a huge opportunity for you to make a lot of money. But the barrier to entry was really hard. You had to be one of the top 20 companies with publishers, and it was very expensive to get on the shelf. Then in 96, Al Gore and other people invented the internet, and out came SaaS companies. You could put your application on the internet, so the barrier to entry was really low, but the cost of the opportunity was really low as well, because people had to wade through crap to find your app. Then in 06, really in 08, but it screws up my whole 6 system, so I'm going with 06, was the year of the app, right? Again, the barrier to entry was low. You just had to get through an app store review. And in the beginning, the opportunity was high. You could make $1 million off of fart apps. But now it's kind of, nobody, or at least I don't, go into the App Store, do a search for a certain kind of app. You always install based on what people told you, because the App Store has way too much stuff in it. And now in 16 is the year of the bots. So the opportunity is really high still. I imagine it'll get saturated here in a couple years. And the barrier to entry is really low as well. So there's a lot of money to be made in the bot marketplace. Slack has the Slack fund if you're interested in investing. They have an $80 million Slack fund if you want to build bots for Slack. Amazon has the Alexa fund, which is, of course, $100 million. They had to do more than Slack. And there's some private funds as well that are specifically focusing on chatbots. Okay, let's talk about kind of the challenges with bots. How do we deal with UI design? How do we talk about conversational UIs? So UI design, now we no longer need boxes and circles and squiggly lines to create our UI. This is pretty much our UI now. This is just an example of how you need to handle a bunch of certain situations. All you have is a text box. So you need to guide users down a certain flow and get them to a certain endpoint, but they can take your app and turn it any which way they want to go. There is no UI to kind of guide them into the next steps. All they have is a text box. So there's a lot of design challenges with this. One is discoverability. How do you know when you start talking to your bot, how do you know what your bot can do? So a good idea is on first contact, be very verbose. So here it says, hey, are you ready to have that meeting? And then it tells them what they can do. So they're kind of training wheels. So as your bot grows, as your user starts using your bot more and more, you can take those training wheels off. You can remove you can reply with yes or no. The other thing is you want to unlock features as time goes by. When your bot first starts up, you don't want to inundate the user with a bunch of, hey, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, because there's no UI for them to help remember what those things are. So as they do stuff, you can tell them about other features your bot can do. So here's an example of someone scheduled a meeting. So what's the next thing that person probably wants to do? They want to know that they can cancel the meeting or reschedule the meeting so your bot can tell them about it. Another challenge is validation. So you don't have any red squiggly lines or red messages to call out validations. What you need to do is you need to handle invalid input, right? So a good way to handle invalid input is to first say what the issue was, then say what they can do to answer that correctly, and then repeat the question, because the user has already forgot what the hell they are answering anyway. Okay, selection. There is no drop-down list in a text box, correct? So how do you provide the user with a bunch of different selections? Facebook introduced a concept of they do paint some boxes on their UI in the new Facebook Messenger bot platform. Slack is also working on this as well. If you've used Slack a lot before, you notice that their Slack bot can have various answers. So right now on Slack, people get around that with numbered responses. Notice this isn't like an open field where they can just type in whatever they want. It gives them choices. And it narrows the choices down. So you can't just say, hey, where do you want to meet, and have them and list 5 different places. Maybe they want to meet at a coffee shop or restaurant or a local bar. They choose one, and then you kind of narrow that selection down. Cool? The other thing you don't want to do is ask them 2 questions at once, unless you want to spend a lot of money and you have a lot of money to handle that. So let's say I'm selling t-shirts, for example. I don't want to ask the user, hey, what's your size and color? Because that just leaves them open to typing whatever they want. Instead, ask them what their size is and give them selections, and then ask the colors and then give them selections. That's a lot easier to do than handling open responses. Okay, feedback. How do you know that your bot, A, got the message, and B, is doing something with it? So a lot of platforms now have this typing indicator. And Slack, at least, I know, that's available in their API. So that little R2 is typing down there, tells the user that that the bot got their message and they're doing something with it. So you don't always want to use that. If your bot doesn't have a lot of processing to do, or it's not responding to a lot, it's not responding with a lot of text, don't use a typing indicator. But if your bot is responding with a lot of text, make it feel like somebody on the other side is actually typing that. Don't just shove it in their face. And you can do that by using some typing indicators. Okay, some best practices for building your bots. I prefer to keep it gender neutral. Referring to your bot as it instead of a he or she. There are instances, obviously, where people assign a gender to their bot's personality, and that's fine if you can do it right in all situations, but I prefer to stay gender neutral with my bots. Instead of the Turing test is actually really, really difficult. And it's actually probably not good for your users. You don't want to trick your users into thinking that they're actually talking to a human. So there's something else called the beer test. And basically, it is, hey, is this bot cool? Does this bot understand me? Would I go out and get a beer with this bot? I know it's a bot, but would I go out and grab a beer with this bot? Yeah, it's going to screw up sometimes, just like your friends when you go out to have a beer. But try to always respond in the personality that you give your bot. The other thing you want to do is give different responses. So as you're guiding your users down to whatever end goal you want them to have, you're going to have responses. If they see those same responses over and over and over, they're going to get bored with your bot. They're not going to want to have a beer with it. And usually you can get away with this like 30 to 40 different responses for each route that you want your bot to go down. I forgot that. The other thing you can do is the users that you're talking about. You know their surroundings. You know where they're from. You know their location. You know the date, current holidays, current other situations like the weather, where they're at. So use things like that. Use their local time and their weather and holidays and current affairs and stuff like that to give your bot some personality. Also, users, once they know they're talking to a bot, they're going to try to break you. So always have a fallback. And when you have a fallback, don't just do the same response. Have multiple responses for your fallbacks. All right. Let's talk about building, how you build a bot. We're specifically going to talk about Slack and Ruby. But this is also applicable on other platforms and obviously other languages. So what is it like? How many people have installed bots in Slack specifically? Okay, cool. So not all of you. So what is it like from a user's perspective to install a bot? So I'm going to go over this first, and then we'll talk about how we do it. So they can go to the Slack app directory, which is at slack.com/apps, and they can choose any apps that they want. We're just going to choose this random one that just happens to be in there. And all the Slack app directory does is send the user to a web, somewhere on the web. Slack is working on the ability to install bots right from Slack, which makes sense. But right now, you have to. All it does is send them to somewhere on the web. And usually there is some add to Slack button, which Slack would like you to use, or if that doesn't go with your branding or such, some way to sign up with Slack. And all that does is OAuth the user. So you guys have all worked with OAuth before. It'll send them back to Slack to authorize the app. And all those are different scopes. We'll talk about the scopes in a bit. But if you look down there, if you have a bot attached to your app, it's going to say, hey, add this. And that's pretty bad to look on the thing, but it says add a bot to your team. Once they click authorize, basically now you have that bot user in your Slack team. And then the next thing that most bots, good onboarding bots will do, will chat with you, will instant message you, and kind of take you on to the next step. In this situation, there's even a video for some goofy-looking guy. But it tells you the next step on how you want to, or what you want to do. Bots cannot join rooms in Slack automatically. A user has to invite them. So if you're a bot that wants to play in different rooms in Slack and different channels, you have to invite your bot. And that's it. And then a bot is just really WebSocket communication between your software and the users. Okay. So how do you, as a developer, create this app? Well, you can go to api.slack.com/application/new and create a new Slack application. This doesn't have to go. This doesn't go through the review process. You can do that now and create whatever you want. Not all the fields need to be filled out unless it goes into review. But I want to call out this box, which is redirect URIs. So this is the OAuth piece. So once a user OAuths their bot on Slack, where do you send them back to? And that is, here's a little pro tip I'm sure most of you know about if you used OAuth. But if you're in development mode and you're on localhost, obviously that is not on the internet, but you can use things like ngrok, or there's a bunch of other local tunnel, where you can basically say, here's a subdomain, and route all traffic from that subdomain.ngrok.io, port 5000, to my localhost. And then the other thing you want to do in a Slack app, if you're going to create a bot, is add a bot user. So this is how Slack knows when you OAuth with your app, that if you have a bot, that's how it puts that little yellow, add this bot to your Slack app. Then currently, right now, probably not in a few months, you need some sort of web component to get that bot to OAuth with Slack. Here's a real-world example. There's the Add to Slack button. People click on that, and underneath The markup for this is basically just a URL on your system to redirect the user to Slack. And if you use Ruby, you need to OAuth, you probably use OmniAuth. There's an OmniAuth Slack gem that's good and keeps up to date with Slack's changes pretty well. And so you add that to your gem file. And in your initializers, if this is Rails, you can also do this in Sinatra or Hanami or whatever web framework you want to use. You configure your OmniAuth, and you want to put your Slack client ID and Slack secret that you got from the Slack App Store in environment variables. Please do not check those in. People are checking those in, and that basically gives anybody that wants to read that API access to that Slack team. And then you want to specify your scopes. If you have a bot, these two scopes are pretty much all you need, unless you do some fancier stuff. Not too fancy, but Slack has really defined scopes. I think they have like 20-something scopes, depending on what you can do. But a bot can do a lot of things that the other scopes, that you need other scopes for. And those are documented, and we'll talk about those. Then, in your route file, you need a route to route the /auth/Slack. After they go to Slack, the callback that they get sent to. And here we're gonna send it to the sessions controller create action. And then in your controller, you get everything that Slack gives you in that environment variable in OmniAuth Slack, or omniauth.auth. If you guys have used OmniAuth, this is the same. Here's an example OAuth response. It's a JSON response. Here's some things you probably want to store in your database. So after your user OAuths, you're going to want to store that user's user ID. It's just the access token. I'm sorry, that is the user ID. The team ID, so the team that the bot authenticated with, or that's your user authenticated with. And the bot info. So this is the bot access token. That's the thing you need to send to all your requests to the Slack API using that bot access token. You can also store the user token, so the user that authorized this app. Usually, sometimes you want to do stuff on behalf of the user instead of the bot, so you can store that as well. That comes back up under credentials. So this is very simplified, but basically you want to store the team in your database, the information about the user in the database, and information about the bot. And this is kind of what the database schema looks like. Basically, you want to store the bot ID, which is the ID you got from Slack, which is like a user ID, a Slack user ID. Bot users in Slack and regular users in Slack have the same interface in terms of the API. There's only a few things that the bot can do that the user can't, and vice versa. And then you want to store your team, which I store the access token there, their domain, their team ID, which is the Slack user ID of the team, and things about your user. I call these champions. These are the people that installed your app. Okay, so the next thing, after you have that information, after you OAuth, now you have information about the team, and you want to start your bot up. There's a really good gem out there called Slack Ruby Client, which is just a API wrapper around Slack. It's got a good API itself. And in Ruby, there is some sort of event loop. You need to start some sort of event loop. So you usually use event machine. And what you want to do is, this is very, very simplified because you need to handle a bunch of different stuff. Because Slack just says, screw you, I'm going to close this connection. They do that all the time. You have to be very verbose in your error handling to kind of not lose communication with Slack. But you want to call this api.slack.com/RTM endpoint, and that gives you a WebSocket URL, and you're acting as the client on that WebSocket, and Slack is the server. Cool? That's, like I said, that's all a bot is. And now you have a WebSocket connection to Slack. Okay, so how does your bot talk? So the first thing you want to do is introduce your bot, right? You just connected your bot, and now you want to introduce your bot. So you have access to this chat.post message is how you post all messages in Slack. And like I said, your bot is not in any room. Your bot cannot talk to different channels. Slack will return an error until you're invited to that channel. So this is how you can DM that user. How you can direct message that user is you have to first open the IM using IM open, and you give it the user ID that you stored. So this is the user that installed your bot, and then you can call chat_post message as part of that Slack Ruby client. Specify the channel that you got back in the response, which is the channel ID for that DM, and then you can put whatever you want in there. You can put text. If you've used Slack, there's a thing called attachments. We won't get into much, but you can make some of your responses look pretty. They don't always just have to be text. Cool? Okay, so how do you listen to what your user says to you? So the Slack Ruby client has these event handlers, and you use the method on to listen to those. And that data there is just a hash. It's a hash of data that was returned from the JSON. And basically you can use, if you choose to, this is just a giant select statement, so when they say stuff, or you can use regular expressions, the smartest artificial intelligence tool. And then you can just reply to that user's message by talking to that channel that they sent into the data. So that data.channel is how you talk to the channel, how you respond back to that user. So that's how you talk, and that's how you listen for users. So once you get a message in, how do you process that message? What do you do? A good tip is to not do this, not have a giant case statement to say, when this, then do this, and when that, then do that. Instead, I recommend putting those behaviors into modules in Slack. And what that does is it lets you isolate how you respond to certain input. And then you can just kind of create behaviors as your bot gets smarter. And if that behavior doesn't handle that input, you just move on to the next behavior. And that's basically your brain of your bot, is those behaviors. So instead of using regex and getting fancy-dancy, because now you kind of have two problems, you can use a natural language processor. So how does that work? How does a natural language processing work? It's actually really, really simple. It's a simple concept, not a simple implementation. Basically, let's say somebody asked your bot, is BB-8 ready to go? You can take that text and you want to get the intent. So based on that sentence structure, what is the intent? So the intent is to get the charge status. Get the charge status of what? Well, it has these things called entities. And it can parse out from that sentence these certain entities. So the target, it might have an entity called target, which is BB-8. So now you want to know who to get the charge status from, and what is the status that you're looking for. And then it also returns a confidence. So you'll get an array of these back, And you just choose with the highest confidence at the top, and or you can choose to handle a different confidence level. And now, today, there are a bunch of these natural language processing as a service apps. The one I have used is Wit AI. Has anybody else used Wit AI? There's also API.ai. I'm going to warn you that Facebook bought Wit.ai, and we also what they did to parse, so use at your own risk. This could go away. Although they're using it to power their own bots, so I don't know if they'll ever shut that down or just not make it public. Use at your own risk. I warned you. And then you can give, inside all these NLPs as a service, you basically specify sentences that the service can learn from. And you specify what the entities are, you create intents, and that's pretty much it. And you can add a bunch of these. There is a wrapper, a gem wrapper around Wit. And it's a really, really simple API. They also handle text or voice. So if you want to send it instead of a text query, there's a voice query where you can send it a voice file. And it will do the voice processing before it processes the text. And then in the response, so you can basically give it the text you're trying to parse and access token, and it will give you this sort of JSON looking, which has your intents and your entities and your confidence. And that's pretty simple. Does anybody have any questions on that? Cool. These slides are available at Speaker Deck. I'm going to show some resources now and talk about them. So you don't have to write these down. These slides are available at speakerdeck.com/jwright if you want these. I am building an open source. I wanted to have it ready for this conference called GotchaBot. And basically what GotchaBot is, it will, since every conference now has a Slack room, a la this conference, it will sit inside the conferences and tag, if you choose to join, it'll tag you and somebody else that you have to go meet in real life at the conference. And then you prove to the bot that you met them, and there's going to be leaderboards and things like that to get people to talk to each other instead of looking at their phones. This is a plug. I created Tetsu. If you want to see how a bot works in some sort of sense with the onboarding especially, you can install this from the Slack app directory. Resources. This is probably the best resource out there. It's a Slack channel for Slack developers. I know. I actually think, so Slack, all the API developers inside the Slack organization hang out in there. There's like over 1,500 developers in there. I think Facebook is starting to hang out there. I don't think anybody told them it's Slack, so they're cool with hanging out in there. Because there's like a Facebook Messenger channel. The API team themselves at Slack are really, really responsive. It's like the best team that I've worked with. They actually listen to you, and they'll get you responses like that. Their documentation is really, really well done. There's a tester out there. It's really well done, and they continue to update it all the time. Speaking of the Slack API team, you can follow them on Twitter. They'll tweet out changes to their API, which are helpful. The API is still changing pretty rapidly. Nothing that's really backwards that hurts you so far. They're just adding features. They're also on Medium, where they post longer articles on how to do stuff. They'll highlight Slack developers and bots and things like that as well. And if you're into email, there's a weekly newsletter called Bot Weekly. I highly recommend that. That'll give you, if you don't get inundated on the internet already with bot stuff and you want more in your email box, that's a good one. And if you guys have any questions or bot-related or otherwise, you can hit me up on Twitter is probably the best way. That's it. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, we have a lot of time. We can answer them now. Yes?
Do they have like a sandbox API?
They don't. So what I usually do is create a development app, a staging app, and a production app in the App Store, and just use those. So people, and then the one that's in the App Store is the production one. Because those redirect URIs are all going to be different for those apps, depending on what environment you're in. And instead of going and changing those, especially if you're on a team, you just create 3 different, or how many environments you have, apps. Yes? Yeah, don't give your AI stuff on the internet that 16-year-old people say on the internet. That's a good. Stay gender neutral. Know who your audience is. So make sure you get things like where they're located and time zones. And know that not all cultures are the same. Not everybody celebrates Cinco de Mayo. Things like that. So when you're saying responses from your bot, just know who you're talking to. Yes?
How much training do you have to do in the language processing side? How many things
So that's something always evolving. What I would recommend, the bots that I've created are not crazy smart. Not a lot of bots nowadays are. This is kind of where we're at. But what I would recommend is log, what your bot doesn't respond to. So in whatever your fallback routine is, make sure you log what that question was or what that response was from your user. Log that and take a look at that, and always update your NLP stuff or your code, usually comes down to. Yes?
Have you found some pattern or system that works well with getting user feedback regarding the bots you build?
Yeah. So 2 things your bot should do. It should respond to a help command. So if a user has no idea what to do next or what your bot can even do, respond to a help command that lists out the main things your bot can do. The other pattern I've seen is people actually have a feedback command. So they will give the bot, they'll do like a feedback or @bot feedback and provide them with feedback that way. I would highly recommend that. There's also I forgot what the bot was, but you can basically say operator, and they'll contact a human on the other side, and you can have a conversation with a human. Kind of like those stupid automated phone machines when all you say is operator, similar to that. So I thought that was pretty cool. The thing I found that's frustrating in developing for the bot, with Slack at least, is there's a few holes in their API. So right now there's no way to know if a user uninstalled your bot without hitting the API and testing it that way. So it would be really cool if you got some sort of webhook communication or some event that somebody uninstalled your bot. Because you don't want to continue talking to the user you can't, but you want your user to know. You want other people that are using that bot, that are using that on your team, to know that it's uninstalled and is no longer functioning. And the other thing is, if you have some sort of communication issue, there are a lot of Slack communication issues. People blame your bot and not Slack, and that can be frustrating. But so you always have to constantly look at status on Slack and follow that. Like just yesterday, Slack lost all the avatars, so people thought that Tetsu wasn't serving up its own avatar, and there was probably 30 support requests about that. So. Anything else? Any questions? If you guys have any questions, I'll be here. Thank you.